micro nano education for everyone.
So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the MNT-EC seminar series and our presentation on grading for equity. So first, we'd like to start off just telling you who we are.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tara Nelson, and I am the Faculty Department Chair for our Civil and Mechanical Engineering Technology program. I'm also an engineering transfer faculty and a PI on a National Science Foundation STEM grant.
And I'm Peter Kazarinoff. I'm engineering faculty at Portland Community College with Tara, and I'm also one of the co-PIs of MNT-EC. And you could see our email addresses. They're on the slides. So if you have any questions about this work, please let us know. So our presentation today is going to be about grading for equity. Before we talk about the specifics of how you can implement grading for equity, we wanted to talk about what our working definition of equity is. So our working definition of equity is that all students will have equal success rates, regardless of race, gender, age, family origin, or disability. And when we're thinking about equity, we're thinking about what are the outcomes for the students. And we can reach out into equity through a number of different ways. And one of those is through inclusion. And that's a way to make space for all students so that they feel welcome and that they feel cared for. So that's kind of the lens that we're going to be working under. So at our college, Portland Community College, we see that students in engineering and technology fields tend to be predominantly male and white, and that the demographics of program completers in engineering and technology fields is whiter and more male than the demographics of the program starters. So the students that start our program, the demographics of that makeup looks different than the students which exit our program. And that we grade students on attributes like punctuality, whether they're in class on time, and attendance, whether they show up, but we don't specifically teach punctuality or specifically teach attendance in our class, but sometimes we're using that as grading criteria.
So one of the things we wanted to talk about is with you all is really under the context of supporting students. So that's what this grading for equity is. So before we dive into the grading for equity, we wanted to just know, what do you all do? How do you support students? So I'm going to click on this Jamboard link. I see someone sends text messages to student on the nights assignments are due. That's great. Integrate growth mindset, metacognition content throughout the course. Oh, I'd love to hear more about how you do that. Anybody want to come on mic and talk, the person who wrote integrate growth mindset, metacognition content?
That was me. I'm Kelly Mercer in Clackamas, Oregon, and my husband and I are in the same room, so there's a little echo. There we go. We do growth mindset metacognition in our classes. It's somewhat integrated in the materials that we actually do, but it's mostly like a question every time they do an assignment for the week. It's just integrated into one part of the assignment where they look at a variety of videos or read articles and just reminders about things like grit and perseverance and the fact that nobody has a math brain. I teach math, those kinds of things. So that's what we do weekly in our classes.
Oh, neat. That's great. I'm also seeing providing lots of feedback, providing options that fit their learning style, student learning style. Someone wrote invite guest speakers from industry, make sure that videos that they create are for students are captioned. I think that's wonderful. Lots of great stuff on here. Let's see. And then in the chat, we've got, let's see, building good relationships with students by calling, texting, phone, and motivating them to do things if they are not doing them, then help find the reason. I think that's all great work. So Peter and I have collaborated on a few projects, and we, along with several other colleagues, read this book, Grading for Equity. And here's a picture of the book. It's by Joe Feldman. And when we read it, we were like, oh my gosh, we need to change how we're working with students and how we're grading our students. And so with the book is written primarily more towards like K-12 type of grading, but there still is a tremendous amount of content that is very applicable in the higher ed learning environment. So the 4 takeaways that we got from the book are be okay with late work, accept revisions, use a rubric grading system, and include both formative and summative assessments. So we're going to go through each of those 4 and talk a little bit about them. The first one is that accept late work. And the reason the book outlines, and then we also have talked about late work, being okay with it, is students, at least in our college, are very, very busy. They're managing kids or jobs, maybe full-time jobs, trying to go to school full-time. I have a student who is the primary breadwinner for his family, and he's also trying to go to school full-time. And so I know that they have a lot going on outside. So I used to have a policy where if you were late, I would take off points. And then have changed that really just to recognize that if students are a little bit late, they just might need that care. Maybe they have, especially during COVID, right? They might have something else going on that they can't meet my deadline. I also realized that in the jobs that I have, and I worked in industry for a number of years before teaching, there were very real hard, I mean, there are always going to be deadlines that you can't miss. Like I couldn't call in and say, can we reschedule this event, right? But there are deadlines in a large project that you maybe have to adjust or push out. So kind of with that mindset, I was like, I'm not sure that we're really holding students to teaching them about how to behave on a job through penalizing them with late work. The other one is accepting revisions and redos. So this one is, some students just need a chance to try it and get some feedback before they really learn it. And so allowing this as an opportunity for the students is really helpful. I think it lowers the pressure in our classes so that our students don't have to get it right the first time. And for me, it kind of let me be okay with giving students like a harder grade or be harsher or stick to the grading rubric in a stronger way because I knew that they could redo this work. My fear was that I was like thinking, I've got 30 students, I have 9 assignments, a bunch of midterms, and if I do revisions on everything, I'm just never going to stop grading. But the reality, at least for me, has been very few students do the revisions. And when they do, I see a tremendous amount of growth with that. It actually makes me feel really good.
Our third idea for equitable grading is to use a rubric that's based on a 4-point scale or a 5-point scale. So before Tara and I started this work, I was grading things generally on a 100-point scale. And what that meant was that 0 through 64 or 65 were all failing grades. And that above that, those were passing grades. And why have more than half of the grading all be failing grades. And it also meant if a student got a 0, that disproportionately affected their grade because we were on that 100-point scale. Also, our college just gives out A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's. Our college doesn't grade on a 100-point scale. So this actually didn't make it any more difficult for me to calculate grades at the end. It's actually just in line with the way that our college does grading. So besides just having a scale which is different, using a rubric for assignments and showing the student that rubric before the assignment is due is another way to make grading more equitable. The kind of lofty idea here is that you would have your grading be grader independent. So say 2 instructors are teaching the same course, maybe you could trade which assignments that you grade, and each one of those instructors should theoretically kind of grade it the same based on the rubric. Because I don't want any of my personal biases or what my background is to affect what the grade is. And so maybe somebody with a different background that they would do that grading differently. Practically making these rubrics has been a bit of front-end time. It takes time to create good rubrics, and it's a difficult task. But a couple benefits is that it's made my assignments better because I'm thinking about how I'm going to assess this in a rubric. And the other is it actually does cut down on grading time because rather than trying to give tenths of points for individual questions, I'm thinking about the broader outcomes that I want a student to get and demonstrate from an assignment. And I can just indicate that on the rubric. And I'm not as worried about, oh, maybe this should be a tenth of a point off or half a point off on an exam. So our fourth pillar of something that you can adopt in your classroom is to use formative and summative assessments. Um, so, oh, I can see in the chat, could you share an example of rubric, maybe on research, presentation, or report? So absolutely, I'd be pleased to do that. And I can send that out to Billy, who should be able to have an email distribution based on whether you showed up here, and we can send you the slides, the links to the Jamboards, and I can definitely send you some of my example rubrics if that would help you. Thanks for that question in the chat. Great. So formative and summative assessments. This might not be something that you're familiar with. And when I read the Grading for Equity book, I roughly had an idea of what these things were, but I didn't really understand how I utilize them in my classroom. So we can break down assessment, and this means like lab reports, homework, in-class work, exams, presentations, grading on those. That would be the assessment, into a formative bucket and a summative bucket. So formative assessment are practice and learning tools, and they help the students practice so that when they do that ultimate summative assessment, that they're able to succeed. So summative assessment is used to assess student learning, and those grades would be counted. So last quarter in my work, what I did is I did not count for a grade formative assessment, and that included homework, in-class worksheets, quizzes, or attendance. But what I did include in grades for the course were summative assessments. And so for me, those were exams, projects, and labs. And so a fourth idea in grading for equity is to divide how you're grading students into a formative group, which would be practice learning tools, don't include those in a grade, and a summative group. That's how you're making sure the student has gotten a learning outcome. That's your goal, and do count those towards a grade.
Okay.
So next, we're going to discuss how we implemented these strategies in our actual courses last quarter. So we've talked about the 4 ideas that you can do for grading for equity. But if you want to know, how did this actually work in somebody's classroom? That's what we're going to go over next.
Thanks, Peter. So in winter term, I teach an engineering graphics, or I taught an engineering graphics course, which is basically AutoCAD, if you know that program. And what I did is I don't have any exams in that class. That was prior to when I've taught it before, in person or virtual as we are right now. So all of the work that they do in class and the practice of the drawing and using the commands is, I turned that into just assessments. And I gave students the opportunity to redo every assessment, so that means every assignment. And I told them that it didn't matter to me if they scored very low. I also used a rubric. So if they scored a 1 or 4, I guess they could redo the assignment. I also used a grading rubric, and what the grading or the rubric allowed me to do was, it's kind of simplified and also clarified for me what I'm looking for. Peter mentioned that rubrics do take a little bit of front end work. And in the past, when I've used rubrics, I've really gotten bogged down on, well, some of it might use a rubric that had a list of all of the categories that would be a 4 and all the the components that would be a 3, and then really get stuck if there was, something missing from 4. So what the rubrics that I used for the AutoCAD assignments are, is this here, and is it perfect? Is it mostly perfect? Is it sort of perfect, or is it not there? And that was kind of the scale that I went with. And then gave students as much feedback as I could about that. The 0 to 4 scale is, my mathematical mind wanted it to be, 4, and then 90% of 4 would be an A, and 80% to 90% is a B. And so that seemed really counter to what we were learning about in the Grading for Equity book. So what I realized is, as the instructor, I get to say what that scale is. And I gave an example of the A, B, and C scale here on the slide in the box. So I set that if you earn 3.4 to 4, that's an A. And if you're 2.4 to 3.3, that would be considered a C, and so forth. My experience using the rubric, really just that clarity. I didn't have to feel bad for giving low grades because I let them revise it. And it really just eliminated a lot of the pain, not all of the pain of grading, but a lot of the pain of grading for me. What I didn't add on here that I also did is I accepted late homework, and and I think, I got some compliments from students at the end of the term and some feedback that they said I got in trouble in the middle of the term because of a health issue in my family. And I really appreciated the opportunity to turn in late work. And they were somebody who got behind and then caught up. So that was good. I also, when I do give going back to the rubric grading, when I give feedback, I make sure that I'm thinking of it as in a kind way. It used to think of it, and by used to last year, think of it as really transactional of you turn this in, I look it over and I see, yes, you did this well, or mostly here's what's missing, this, and this. And this is not necessarily in the book, but I think it aligns with the grading for equity. One of my colleagues at PCC posted a blog on our learning management platform that she's from the communications department. And she said, you should make sure that your feedback is kind because that's a way to support students, engage them in the classroom. So now I start every assignment feedback with something positive, the constructive change that they need to make, and then I end it with something positive. And I try to say as often as I can that they're doing great, this really hard work. For me, it's important to make it authentic language because I don't want, if I feel like it's being sarcastic, then it's going to come out to them as sarcastic. So I want to make sure that it's something that is really, truly good and not just, which isn't too hard to do getting into the practice of it. Peter, do you want to talk about your class?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about how it went in my class. Also in the chat, I see Brandon said in the past that he's had students grade a sample assignment before they do theirs so they can assess their own work similarly. That's a great strategy and a great way to use the rubric. So thanks for that, Brandon. So the course that I taught last quarter was ENGR 114, which is an engineering programming course. And I broke up the assessment in the class into the two groups, formative assessment and summative assessment. And in the formative assessment, that was homework, in-class work, and there was no course credit associated with it, although I did release the solution keys to the homework. And over the course of the quarter, I definitely got emails from students that said, oh, I'm sorry, my homework's going to be late. And I was like, that's totally fine. When you get to it, you can turn it in and there's no credit associated with it. So that won't negatively affect your grade. And it was kind of freeing to be able to do that rather than negotiating with students what a late penalty should be. And then in the summative assessment category, I included labs and exams. And for both labs and exams, I accepted redos, and I also accepted late work. And I attached a 5-point rubric to each one of the exams and rubrics to most of the labs. I didn't get around to doing rubrics for all of the labs. The other thing that I did was I gave sort of open-ended exams rather than a traditional exam in engineering or technology fields that might have multiple choice or matching short answer kind of questions. It was a more open-ended kind of task that was, here is some data, plot this data, and then derive some meaningful statistics from it. Would be like an example of a more open-ended exam. And I see in the chat, Rashmini says, could you say more on open-ended exams? Yeah, so I guess maybe one way to think about it would be think about exams a little bit more like projects and a little bit less like traditional exams. And that helped me a little bit in my exam assignment design. The other thing to make exams a little more open-ended to think about is what kind of medium are you going to accept as a completed exam? So a more open-ended exam, you might accept a presentation, you might accept a paper, you might accept a video as possible ways of doing that exam. and that would also be a little more open-ended. It's difficult to do, to make these open-ended exams, but certain students I felt like really enjoyed the idea that they could go about the exam however they wanted, and other students had trouble with it. They just wanted to know, tell me what to do, and I'll do it. And my response was, you have the data. What you need to do is plot it and derive some meaningful statistics from it. So I hope that helps. And then in the chat from Jill, hi Jill, says, what equity criteria do you include in the rubric? So it depends on the assignment, what criteria are in the rubric. But some criteria that I don't include in the rubric would be, is the assignment on time? Or was the assignment, what else wouldn't be fair? Oh, was the student present when the assignment was submitted? But what I would do is look at the course outcomes and see if I can pull out one or two of the course outcomes and have that be a line of criteria in the rubric, or break that course outcome into 2 or 3 different criteria that I could assess separately. And hopefully the other way that the grading rubrics were a little more equitable is that I shared my rubric with the other instructor that was teaching the other section of the course. And hopefully that she would look at the same assignment and give that same assignment the same score using the rubric that I did. So adding in enough specificity in the rubric so that another instructor could use it, I think that increases the equity of the grading system, and have enough specificity that, like Brandon said in the chat, that students would be able to use it and grade a sample assignment are a couple of the ways. So if these ideas sound interesting to you, the idea of accepting late homework, number 1, number 2, accepting redos, number 3, using rubrics, and number 4, dividing summative and formative assessment, you might be thinking, oh gosh, this could potentially go horribly wrong. And next, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we learned. So one of them was that redos didn't drastically increase workload. This was my biggest fear, that if I allowed students to do redos, I was going to have to do triple the amount of grading. But the total number of students who did redos was relatively small. And like Tara mentioned, it was kind of more joyful to grade the redos, because I saw what the student had done on their first attempt, and their second attempt was always better. So you already graded the first attempt anyway. So you've got that rubric already filled out. So the total amount of work to grade the redos was usually less than the amount of work to grade the original one. And quite very few students did it anyway. So that didn't actually impact the amount of work I had to do. Also, it was a huge relief not to enforce due dates. I previously sort of felt like I was either going to be a medical doctor, or I was going to be an attorney, or I was going to be somebody's work supervisor, to be able to say, yes, that excuse for not turning your homework in time, that excuse counts, it's okay. But this other excuse for not turning in your homework on time, that excuse is not okay. And so you should be docked. And it was just a relief not to enforce that and to email students back and say, the due dates are posted in the learning management system, but there's no credit docked if you submit after that date. And I see a question in the chat from Linda. She says, how do you encourage students to complete formative classwork, especially online? I can see many students skipping since these grades aren't involved. So that's exactly what I wanted to go over next. So in my course, students handed in less homework and students handed in less in-class worksheets. And how did I encourage them to complete? Well, one was just in the learning management system. I set due dates and I did give a 1 or a 0 on those assignments. It's just in the learning management system that 1 or 0 was not calculated in their grade. So for some students, just seeing the 1 or the 0 and just seeing the due date was helpful. And then kind of the other thing that I'd mention, and it's hard to know this for sure because we didn't do like a double-blind experimental trial, but maybe it's true that some students don't need to do the extra homework practice, because if I look at a histogram of the grades in the class, it was not drastically different than the histogram of the grades the previous quarter. So maybe for some students, they don't need that extra practice and they could spend that time at their job or commuting or with their children or taking care of someone else. So that's the other thing maybe I'd think about. And then the last thing that I learned was that the 4-point grading scale and rubrics increase grading consistency and actually help me grade a little bit quicker. So are there other things, Tara, that you learned over the course of the quarter that you wanted to share?
Well, I guess I want to just go back to what you said about the class being more joyful. I felt like by implementing the parts that I implemented, it just seemed like the students just had a little bit better time. They were able to engage with me in a better way, which I really appreciate. So I learned a lot of what you learned, Peter, with the redos didn't drastically increase the workload. I saw in the chat, Scott, you wrote that you get more students completing redos if you don't assign a grade on the first attempt. And that seems really interesting to me as a technique to provide feedback, but give them almost really like a different level of encouragement for those redos. And then Angela, I see that you said that you found that redos tend to be done by the A students. And I actually didn't see that when I did the redos. I had a student who consistently scored a 1 for the first 4 weeks of the term, and then and along with that, I will do a lot of reaching out to the students and sending emails. And I feel like we've been remote. There's a lot more happening via email. So it's easier to connect with the students in some ways because it's a quick email that I send. And so after several weeks of their missing, kind of really missing the content, I reached out and said, why don't we meet and on Zoom. So we did that, and I was able to correct and work with her to kind of correct where her where parts of where she was missing. And then after that, she really improved and became more of a 3-4 student. And so that felt really good to be able to have this. And I didn't feel like I was giving her any special treatment necessarily because of the flexibility built into the class already. So yeah, I guess that's what I would also say about my experience.
I can see in the chat that Kathleen says Canvas quizzes allow instructors to ensure learning before students progress through modules without imposing grades. So that's an interesting idea, giving a quiz that does have right and wrong answers on it, but doesn't have course credit associated with it to get to the next part of the course. And Rashmi says, I also found rubrics very helpful and time-saving when I did grading. Yeah, that's great to hear. That was my experience too, that having the rubric cut down on the amount of time that it took to grade assignments, which was a nice little benefit. So Tara, what are we planning on doing next quarter?
Well, we are recognizing that this is, a growth. We're not the be all and end all experts at this, and there's a lot of material out there and a lot of places we want to learn, or things that we want to learn. Peter and I, along with several of our colleagues, have had conversations about how can we just totally shift this system, and what would that look like if we just blew it up and recreated it? What would that look like? So we're still exploring that question. And one of the things that I would like to do and would love to hear if you're doing this, finding better ways for students to bring in their lived experiences that will honor their all their current knowledge. Knowing that many of the students that we see engineering is very new to them. So that's one thing that I'm kind of working on and thinking about. I'd like to focus more on transparent assessments or assignment design. And so I'm working on that. And I'd also like to completely do away with exams. And some other courses that I teach when I've taught them, very structured of homework and exams. What I'm kind of just thinking about, how would I do away with exams completely, and what would that assessment look like? How about you, Peter?
So of the 4 ideas, accepting late work, accepting redos, using rubrics, and separating formative and summative assessments, I'm going to continue to do those 4 things in my classes. And I'd also like to learn more about transparent assignment design and making sure that my rubrics and my assignments line up well. And it's a challenge to move exams away from a multiple choice, short answer mode and move them more into like a project sort of open-ended mode. So I'd also like to try to do that a little bit. With typical engineering classes, that isn't always the modality that we're used to or that I was taught in at all. So it feels a little uncomfortable to take away regular exams and to turn them into more open-ended assessments. So we'd like to hear about your reaction to our 4 ideas, and what are you excited about trying? So I'm going to copy a link into the chat, and we invite you to put some sticky notes into the second Jamboard. What are you excited about trying? What do you want to learn more about? What do you think some barriers are? And then what did we miss when we were talking about equity in grading and equity in student outcomes?
Yeah, so yes, I have a question. Because I also allow my students to turn in their assignments late, and some of them just take advantage of that. Everything is late. So at some point they are 3-4 weeks behind, and then they're so behind that they're kind of lost in the class. So how do you balance, in 1 or 2 late assignments versus, you want to make sure that the student doesn't exaggerate, doesn't take advantage of that?
That's a great question. And I guess I'll answer with saying, I don't know that I do. I kind of get to a point where I think, in some ways I think well, if that's just the way they are and they might just be late, or they might just really be struggling with turning things on time. It might be a conversation of, I've noticed that these are always late, and is there any way that I can help you with that? I do know that probably students are going to take advantage of that. And I don't know, but I don't have an answer for you. That finding that balance. I think there are students who are always going to be challenging the the intent. And I think for personally, I sort of feel like that just might be a part of the game, or part of the deal with allowing this, is knowing that people will take advantage. But yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, Marco, I really like that question, because I experienced some of that too. And what I sort of tried to do was just step back and think of the student with as much empathy as I could. Not that they were like pulling strings behind some curtain and like game theorying out, how can I do as little work as physically possible and still like get an A in the course?
Yeah.
And rather, that student probably has a lot of stress going on in their life right
yeah,
now.
Absolutely.
And if that's what they need, and that they can still do the learning outcomes for the course, like that's awesome. That's success for them. So I think it does happen, but I just tried to look at it as in a different way. And I really appreciate that question. That's a great question.
Does it happen that students ask you if they can bring their children into the classroom because they have no place to leave them? I have, it happened to me consistently. I have one or two moms that, every semester they ask if they can, not every time, but a number of times. And how do you guys feel about that? How do you accommodate a student that doesn't have a place to leave a child?
That hasn't happened to me very many times. And when it does, it's usually an older child, and they keep them entertained with a movie on a device. Yeah, so I haven't done that. I haven't had that happen to me many times at all. That's a tough one.
Yeah, well, Los Angeles is things. Yeah, some things are getting difficult in Los Angeles as well.
So Marco, I have had this happen to me. Like as the instructor, I had the sick child that I had to bring to work before. And like I gave her a Kindle and set her up in the back. And at the beginning of class, I just said, that's my daughter. She's got to hang out because she can't go to school today. And from my point of view, if that isn't preventing students from learning and it's allowing some students to learn, then I just use that maybe as the criteria. But I understand that it's a difficult subject to deal with. Tara, what have we got on the Jamboard? What are some of the highlights on there?
Well, let's see. There's a lot of words. On the category of what did we miss, there's a question about student feedback on your experience, and did we see a difference in student success rates based on what you did? And so I guess I'll say on the feedback that I gave, I only did it for one class, and I had it was relatively small, 17 students. So it's hard to say if they were more successful on that. I do know that I feel like I had more students connecting with me in ways that they hadn't. Last term in the winter was my very first term teaching this in any sort of remote. Normally it was in person and face-to-face. So there's a big barrier anyway that's added. So it's really hard to say if things improved. I want to say they absolutely did, because I felt better. And I felt like it was just a way to engage with students. Let's see. Peter, is there anything that you noticed? Oh, you're on mute, I think, or I can't.
Under the barriers to adoption, one of the bottom ones says, does allowing redo and late help with preparing them for the work environment? Can you be late for work? Can you not meet a deadline? Can you always redo your professional work? And yeah, that was something that I was worried about. Is the person who put that card down, are you willing to talk a little bit more about that and what work is like for your students when they leave the classroom? Is there another one, Tara, that you think we should highlight for this seminar?
Well, I was excited to see that there are some people who are, looking at possibly, somebody said playing with feedback and self revisions and reflection, helping students revise their own work. I think that seems exciting to me to hear that other people are planning on doing that.
All right, so after the seminar, we'll make sure to share links to these two Jamboards as well as our slide deck, and I'll include a sample rubric that I designed. So you'll have access to these Jamboards after the seminar, and I definitely want to go back through and read because I think there's some really great nuggets in there. There are just a lot of words on the Post-its to be able to do it right now. So Tara, if people are excited about this, what are some ways that they can keep on learning?
Great. Well, we've got a few links in here in this in the presentation. We highly recommend for Equity by Joe Feldman. We have a website, and you can go to that website and get some examples and take a look at that. It's called gradingforequity.org. And then the transparency in learning and teaching, that's the TILT framework. There's a website there and how to set up your assignments. So you have that TILT just to help with that transparency for students, because when things are transparent, then students understand it. And then the last is an article that we read recently from the Chronicle of Higher Ed on recommendations for inclusive teaching practices. So it was neat for me to read those and see how they complemented the grading for equity work, and then also some additional practices. And it's really great because it has like, try this. Like it says, try to have a class with a lot of structure and you're not talking all the time. So that's something I'm thinking about as I start to put together my courses. And with that, just wanted to thank you all for being here, and we've got some time, I believe, for questions.
I do have a question. This is Angela from Lane Community College. I have taught with the or graded with the 0 through 4 before, and I love it. It's real clear to the students. I know what an A is. I know what a C is. So it's quick grading. But what we now use is My Open Math or that type of online quizzes and so forth. And it's really hard to grade those in that way because each question, like in a math class, each question is worth, 1 or 2 points. It's not based on that 0 through 4 scale. So I'm just wondering if you have any experience, or if anyone has any experience using these online platforms with that 0 through 4 type grading, because I've had to go away from it to be able to use these online platforms.
I don't have any experience, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't have any either. That if the platform you're using enforces a 100-point grading scale, what are you gonna do? One thing that I might think about, or like possibly frame your thinking, is this formative or summative, the work that they're doing on the platform? And maybe if some of it's formative, that you wouldn't have to assess it, that it's for practice for the students getting better. But yeah, that's an interesting problem, especially if the platform is like enforced by the department or your college.
I actually do have experience with that. We use my open math too. I'm at Clackamas Community College. So one thing I've done is I'll have an end of the week sort of summative quiz where there are 10 or so questions that are coded into my open math that are kind of right or wrong, but I actually have them all worth 0 points. And then I score using a 0 through 4 rubric at the end based on some reflections they do on the questions they miss. So they're able to submit at the end, see which ones they got right and wrong, see the answer key, and then write a little bit about a couple questions they missed, where they're still struggling, things like that. And then I can score that, together with how they did on, if they missed most of the questions, I can kind of count that into how I'm using the rubric as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Are there other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Billy.
I just want to address Angela's. When I worked at Dakota County Technical College, there was some times where it had to be on a 100-point scale. And if we only wanted it to be 5 points, we just multiplied whatever they got, by whatever to make it equal on the 100-point scale. It's a little bit more work on our end, but the students didn't suffer because the system that we had it built in to a way that we didn't want it. So, I mean, there's always that, which is probably what you're already doing. But you're not the only one that has those issues with that as well. It wasn't until we went to the new system where we could actually put in how much we wanted each graded assignment to be worth. But in the old system, we were just stuck on that 100-point scale. So we just let the students know that, this is going to be a 5-point assignment or whatever, but in the LMS, it's going to show a different grade, and just know that they match.
One thing I'm not sure that we mentioned with that 100-point scale that I'm going to for sure go away from with all my classes is if a student misses an assignment and that's a 0, you can't give them any points for missing that assignment, and say they're an A student, it just really pulls their grade just like a big old anchor that I'd like to. That's why I'm shifting to the 0 to 4. If a student misses an assignment, it's not so bad for their overall grade.
Does anyone else have questions or contributions?
I have a question regarding, you guys are teaching engineering course. For a student to come out of an engineering course to be able to be employable, they have to pass some pretty nasty tests, boards, exams, and such like that. And I have a question regarding, after you've gone to this methodology of testing and grading, what is the results regarding your students and their capabilities of passing these exams? That's all I have at that point.
Tara, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
That is a great question. I think, you're thinking of the fundamentals of engineering and the professional licensing exam. And I think about like exam style. I hadn't actually thought about that. We're at a community college, so we're teaching the 100 and 200 first year courses. So getting students to the point of taking those exams it's like we just don't see the students when they're doing that. So it wasn't something I'd been thinking about. I think that's worth exploring a little bit and talking with our university partners too on how that will shape, you know, what they're doing and making sure our students are prepared for that format as well, and giving them that practice early on. And we just haven't gotten there to that point of kind of that broader view. We've just tried it out in our courses this last couple of terms.
So we haven't got any track record regarding this. I guess my follow-up question on that is, as you alluded to, how do these students who are graduating or leaving your program deal with the university level when they finally get to real engineering programs and are going to be expected to have their information in on time at the expected and within the parameters that they would be dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, that's something to talk about and think about. And you know, I don't know how the university partners are looking at this kind of thing. I still feels like the right thing to me to do for the supporting. And I kind of feel like at this level that we're working with the students, just getting them to that next step and making sure they're learning is important. And I guess I'm kind of hoping, to be fully transparent, that the passing the appropriate tests and doing all that will come when they have a good solid foundation of content. It's kind of where I'm at with that. What do you think, Peter?
I think it's a great question. We don't know for sure because we started implementing this year. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I do wonder a little bit, is it our responsibilities to have them pass the FE and the PE? In the law profession, law school doesn't really prepare you to take the exams, and students take separate classes for that. But it's an interesting thing to sort of explore. Yeah. So Billy, we're at 12:02. Can you kind of head us out? And I'm certainly willing to sit on the Zoom meeting and chat for a little bit longer.
Yeah,
Can I
well,
just quickly-
thanks everybody. Go
I'll
ahead.
just quickly add something that I teach science at high school level, and we are also applying new science standards. And idea behind all these things is generating interest in student. And if a student is interested, then student may go above and beyond to learn something, not just worrying about passing the test. So giving flexibility and rubrics and all of these things that you suggested, I think it may help in generating the interest. And it's all about sparking an interest in student. So that's my thought on it, and hope.
Thank you.
Thanks.